let me tell you what I know. I know that you've watched and enjoyed some very inspiring TED Talks. And it's also the truth that you understand and for the most part accept the various cases made by the presenters. But the truth is this: very few, if any of you, have changed your behavior based on that knowledge. If you did, if we all did, it would profoundly change the world in which we live. So let me be the first to confess. I've watched Sir Ken Robinson make his very moving case for an education system that encourages and nurtures creativity. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. But I haven't done a thing to help make that a reality. I've listened to Brené Brown describe passionately the power of vulnerability. And I agree with her too. But I'm still quite guarded. And I've watched Amy Cuddy articulate how our body language shapes who we are. But I got to tell you, I did not take a power pose before I walked out on the stage to boost my testosterone and confidence level. I think maybe I should have, you know. Let me tell you what else. I don't get enough sleep. I use too many paper towels. I know that. I sit at my desk for hours on end without moving, and I still buy bottled water. What am I doing? What are we all doing? Now, Gandhi said the difference between what we are doing and what we are capable of doing would solve most of the world's problems. I know this difference firsthand. I mean, just recently, I was encouraged to hear from executives at a well-known organization that they fully understood and agreed with the advice I provided. Yet, when I returned later to review their progress, I found that they had done the exact opposite. They'd gone right back to those stifling routines that existed before I got there. Now, I'm sure you've experienced similar disappointments in your life, right? A loved one who continued to smoke or abuse drugs despite the facts, or a friend who resisted change in the face of overwhelming evidence. So why don't we do what we know we should do, what we're capable of doing, and solve our problems? Why don't we take the knowledge we gained from TED Talks and change our world? What's wrong with us? You see, to me, there seems to be a disconnect between what we watch, read, and hear, let's call it the data input, and our subsequent actions, the behavioral output. What's wrong? Are we all broken computers? Is that what the problem is? You see, I don't think so. I think it's that metaphor that's broken. It's a faulty metaphor, that the brain is a computer. It's not. Computers are lifeless machines which deal in facts. They execute static programs. Then they don't care, machines don't care, computers don't care about their perceptions, their changing desires, whether they look good to themselves or to others. They're not driven at all by their futures or their desires. They don't crave control by their futures or their desires. They don't crave control. Human beings are amazing, warm-blooded creatures who deal in their personal truths. Our minds are dynamic systems, which, like other animals, are influenced by our changing perceptions and desires. That's the nature of who we are. And you know, you understand this. You do. Intuitively, you get it. And that's why when comedians make this apparent to us, we start laughing, don't we? Take a look at this and tell me, would you suddenly, if you were a computer, would you suddenly desire to eat this menacing-looking creature simply because someone changed its name? No, a computer wouldn't do that, right? It makes no sense. But human beings do. In 1977, a fish wholesaler named Lee Lance was first exposed to this crazy-looking fish, the Patagonian toothfish, which at the time, fishermen considered junk, throwaway. I mean, if you were reeling this thing in, wouldn't you throw it away? I'd throw it away. But Lance, he sensed that people would enjoy its white flesh and mild taste, but not its name. So he began selling this cold water cod as Chilean sea bass. Now, you heard me right. It's not even a bass, it's cod, right? Now, is this important? Why is this important? Or is this just a fish story? It's very important to understand because it tells us how human beings respond in the world and how they make decisions. To me, Mark Twain put it best. He said, when we remember we are all mad, the mysteries disappear and life stands explained. We are not fleshy machines who make decisions based on the facts. We are mad, feeling creatures who are being pushed and pulled by our environment, by our instincts, our truths. I know what you're probably thinking, some of you, maybe most of you. Facts, truth, come on, what's the difference, right? Trust me, there is a profound difference. And if you're interested in solving your problems and changing the world, you need to be intimately aware of what that difference is. The screenwriter, Robert McKee, wrote, "What happens is fact, not truth. Truth is what we think about what happens." So here's a fact. You and I are outgrowths of a huge living sphere that's rocketing through space right now faster than a bullet shot out of a gun around another ball of fire. That is a fact, but it is not your truth. You see, if it was your truth, if you defined yourself as the world rather than this little short-term passenger on it, it would profoundly affect how you live your life. Now listen, certainly we make decisions based on facts. Let's end that debate right now, right? Like the price of a cup of coffee, which I just read is going up. So go get your coffee now. But we only do that if those facts support our personal truths, and primarily these three. Aesthetics, the look and feel of what we perceive. Control, whether we believe we have control over what we perceive. And identity, how the choices of what we perceive will affect our futures, especially the evolving story of who we think we are and who we want to become. Aesthetics, control, identity. So let's start with aesthetics, because in our environment, that's where we usually start, right? What draws us into anything new. So aesthetics is simply our desire for sensory pleasure and stimulation. The look, feel, taste, and engagement of stimuli in our environment. We're drawn to beautiful, fun, and entertaining objects and experiences like an iPhone or the latest blockbuster film. But here's the thing. Like a field exploding with flowers, there's always a new, colorful, enticing thing popping into our view. And it is in our nature to be drawn to it. And it's the nature of the evolving marketplace to keep producing them. So like bees and butterflies, we're being pushed and pulled by our environment, and we're largely unaware of it. But unlike simpler creatures, human beings have the amazing capacity to imagine and construct our future. And that's why we're always making predictions, right? Because we want to be able to predict and steer our journeys. And what's the environment do? It responds to that desire with devices, experience, and data to help us do just that, to predict the results that we can expect, and to help us measure and optimize everything, like our calories, the expenditure of calories, our charitable contributions, even our travel plans. Now, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about this. maybe measurement and data, maybe that'll solve all of our problems. I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. I have my doubts. It was probably about a little while back, a couple months ago, I saw this guy at the gym flat on his back, shaking his hands like this. And I got really nervous. I walked over and I said, "Hey, are you okay?" And he says, "Look, I'm fine. I have my family and my friends, we upload our activity levels each night to the internet so we can track each other's progress." He had that little activity tracker attached to the glove on his hand. He said, "I'm just adding more steps to my workout." This is true. Because why? Because he cared about his story, the story about him and what other people thought. See, Mark Twain and all the other humorists, they had it exactly right. We are all nuts people. And once we understand that, everything starts to make sense. Now listen, just as our tastes change and evolve, our sense of control waxes and wanes. It's like traveling or any personal or professional relationship, right? Sometimes we're behind the wheel, we're in control, and at other times, we're passengers on someone else's trip. So a sense of control is important in that it helps us feel engaged, empowered, but it's not enough to prevent us from jumping off to a different vehicle. So what keeps us interested, engaged, even zealous? You know what your mind's telling you does that? I know. It's that faulty metaphor kicking in again. That dangerous thought that says, I know what it is. It's information. If we can just get more data up there and do it in an engaging and persuasive way, that will keep people invested, passionate. But we've already learned that's not true, because our brains are not those types of machines that make decisions based on facts. So what is it? What does it? It's not information. Information doesn't move us. Desire moves us. And desire is ignited and grows around our most potent personal truth, our identity. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Who we think we are is why we do what we do. In 2013, I was fascinated by this little study out of Stanford University. It was called Virtual Superheroes. So the researchers gave participants the ability to fly using virtual reality. Some were passengers in a helicopter. Others flew under their own power with their arms extended. What the researchers found was that the people who flew like Superman were later more likely to help other people in the real world. You know what their theory was? Their theory was that their inner experiences inspired them to embody the role of superhero without them having the slightest clue. Well, I'm here to tell you, it's not a theory. It's a universal truth. We embody our roles, our values, our stories. We live in those stories, and we live according to them. We feel like rebels when we zip up our leather jacket and hop onto our motorcycles. We imagine ourselves as published authors when we grab another cup of coffee and sit down to confront a blank page. And sadly, if we think of ourselves as old and worn out, we become old and worn out. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote, "A single dream is more powerful than 1,000 realities." Those 1,000 realities, those are the facts, the data, and we are hypnotized by a powerful and dangerous illusion that those realities will cause us to care, agitate for change and improve lives. But they won't, because we're not rational thinking machines who deal with facts. We're amazing, passionate creatures who are moved by our personal truths. Yes, aesthetics, the visual and the evocative, draws us in. And yes, a sense of control makes us feel empowered and autonomous. But it's those imaginative, invisible stories, our inspiring visions of the future, which turn us on and keep us lit up, buzzing with possibility. So ask yourself, who am I? What story am I living? Because it's our identity, it's our personal narratives that move us to change the world and to improve our lives and move us to change the world and to improve our lives, narratives that move us to change the world and to improve our lives and the lives of others. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Let me tell you about my mom. My mom was 42 years old when I was born, and she started exercising for the first time in her life. She started by running around the block, and then she started doing 5K races, and then she started doing 10K races, and after that, she ran a marathon, and after that, my mom did a triathlon. By the time she was 57 years old, my mom was trekking uphill to the base camp of Mount Everest. And let me tell you about my dad. When I was a kid, my dad used to take me to science classes. He was also my calculus teacher in high school. I wanted to crawl under the desk. Well, I learned something important from my mom, the value of health, and I learned something important from my dad, the value of science. And these two values have guided me on my trek through life, and they've helped me appreciate an epidemic that we are all facing. And it's not Ebola. Instead, it is the epidemic of unhealthy living. 500 million people worldwide are obese. And you would think that 50 years after the first U.S. Surgeon General's report on the dangers of tobacco was published, that we'd be beyond the problem of smoking. Today, 1 billion people worldwide use tobacco. Tobacco and obesity are two of the most preventable causes of premature death. Solving these problems is like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle. We engage in unhealthy behaviors because of our genetics, because of brain neurotransmitters, because of environmental influences such as peers and the media. Each of those pieces of the puzzle are not things that you and I can solve on our own. But there is one piece of this puzzle that may hold the key. Our choices about what we do with our cravings to engage in addictive behaviors like smoking or in overeating. Our choices. There is a new science of self-control that may hold the key to reversing these epidemics. It's called willingness. Willingness means allowing your cravings to come and to go while not acting on them by smoking or eating unhealthy. But actually, I'm not talking about willpower And I'm not talking about power through your cravings. Instead, I'm talking about a different notion of cravings that looks like this. Dropping the struggle with your cravings, opening up to them, letting them be there, and making peace with them. Now, at this point, you may be very skeptical. I was, when I first heard about it years ago. A friend of mine came to me with a book on willingness. He said, "Jonathan, this book will change your life forever." And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll check it out." So I went through it and thought, nah, it's a bunch of psychobabble. Toss it aside. Until some years later, when my wife brought me to a workshop on willingness at the University of Washington. And I was blown away. So then I read the book, and then I read a lot of books on willingness, and I got trained in it. And what I learned was that willingness is part of acceptance in the acceptance and commitment therapy approach to behavior change. It's a broad approach to behavior change that's being used to help people with anxiety disorders, with addictions. Even some innovative companies are now using it to help improve their employees' performance and reduce their stress. Now, to understand why I was blown away, you have to understand the world that I live in. In my research world, a common way you help people quit smoking and lose weight is you teach them to avoid their cravings. Avoid thinking about smoking. Distract yourself from food cravings. There's a song from a Broadway show that captures this perfectly. It goes like this. When you start to get confused because of thoughts in your head, don't feel those feelings. Hold them in instead. Turn it off like a light switch. Just go click. We do it all the time when you're feeling certain feelings that just don't seem right. Treat those pesky feelings like a reading light and turn them off. We all live in this world where the song we keep hearing is turn off the bad feelings. Now, let's take a look at these cookies. They just came out of the oven. Oh, they are so good. Oh, they're so delicious. Just feel that craving to eat those cookies. Oh, they're lovely. They're so good. Now, turn it off. Turn it off. You want those cookies even more now, right? You see the futility of trying to turn it off. You can't turn it off. And maybe you don't have to. Maybe you can leave the light on. Here is how. My research lab at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center here in Seattle is conducting randomized clinical trials to see if showing people how to be willing to have their cravings is effective for quitting smoking. We are conducting trials in face-to-face interventions, in a telephone quit smoking hotline, in a website called webquit.org, and in an app called SmartQuit. These technologies have the potential to reach millions of people with interventions that could save their lives. That's pretty amazing. And let me tell you about the data. When you pool together the results from 6 clinical trials, all 6 that have been published to date, including trials conducted by our colleagues, what we see is that for the people who were assigned to the avoidance approach, avoiding your cravings, some of them quit smoking. And it varied depending on the study. However, for the people who were randomly assigned to the willingness condition, twice as many quit smoking. Very, very encouraging. Now, of course, the data only tell us one small part of the story. So to help you see willingness in action, I'm going to weave together experiences I've had in counseling people for quitting smoking. And I'll together refer to them as one person that we'll just call Jane. So, as is typical of people who come in to want help for quitting smoking, Jane was a 45-year-old person who started smoking when she was a teenager. She tried to quit smoking several times, was not successful. So she was very skeptical that anything new was going to be helpful to her for quitting, and yet she was really hopeful that this time would be different. So the first thing that I showed Jane was to be willing, that is to be aware of her cravings in her body. So to notice where she felt cravings in her body. And what I did is I asked her to journal that, and just to track the intensity over time and to see if she'd smoke afterwards. So in the middle of explaining this, she stops me and she says, "What are you talking about? I don't have cravings. I just smoke." So I said, "Well, why don't you try it, and we'll see what happens, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else." So she came back a week later, and she said, "You know, I've been tracking my cravings. I've been tracking them all the time. And now, I can't stop thinking about smoking. What am I supposed to do?" Well, before I tell you my answer, let's look behind the scenes. Now, what was probably going on here was that Jane was having cravings all along. And like a lot of us, she was living on autopilot. You wake up in the morning, you smoke a cigarette, you have a cup of coffee, you smoke a cigarette, you get in the car, you smoke a cigarette. We're often just not aware of what we think and what we feel before we act. So, my answer to Jane was to be willing. And one of the ways I showed her to do that was with an exercise called I Am Having the Thought. So, one of Jane's thoughts before she had a cigarette was, "I'm feeling a lot of stress right now. I really need a cigarette." So I asked her to add the phrase, "I'm having the thought," like this. "I'm having the thought that I'm feeling a lot of stress right now. I really need a cigarette." Then I asked her to add the phrase, "I'm noticing I'm having the thought." So, "I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I'm feeling a lot of stress right now. I really need a cigarette." Now, we can all do an exercise like this when we have any kind of negative thought. Like for my thought, that I'm boring all of you with my talk. And I'm having the thought that I'm boring all of you with my talk. So what this exercise did is it gave me a little bit of space between me and my thoughts. And it's in that space that I can choose not to run off the stage in front of 1,500 people. And the fact is, we don't act on every thought we had, because if we did, we'd all be in a whole lot of trouble. So this was helpful to Jane, but there was something else that was really difficult for Jane, and I felt a lot of compassion for her about it. And that was the judgment that she felt from people when she would be outside smoking a cigarette. The criticism from her husband for being a smoker, and the self-loathing that she developed about smoking. And she dealt with this shame by having a cigarette, which gave her relief temporarily until the shame came back. So I said to Jane, what would it be like if we tried to honor this feeling of shame as part of the human experience? If you had a close friend who was feeling shame about smoking, I said to Jane, what would you offer this friend as words of caring and kindness? And could you then offer those words to yourself, Jane? And she looked up, and she had this look of this temporary respite from the shame, which made it just a little bit easier next time not to act on the craving. So here's the secret to self-control. The secret to self-control is to give up control. Because otherwise, we get into a tug of war with a monster, a craving monster. And the craving monster says, come on, smoke a cigarette. Come on, have that cookie. Come on. And you're on the other side saying, no, craving monster, I'm going to distract myself from you. I'm going to ignore you. No, 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 no. And craving monster says, no, no, come on, you know you want it. And you're just back here, and you're going back and forth and back and forth, and pretty soon the craving monster overpowers you. You have that cookie, you have that cigarette, until the craving monster comes back. And then you're in the tug of war again, doing what we've learned how to do, unless you drop the rope. And what you discover is if you just allow the monster to occupy a space in your body, you discover in a few minutes that the craving monster is not as threatening as he appears. And sometimes he even goes away. As we break for lunch, we're going to have choices of what to eat. We're going to have choices of what to eat. As we break for lunch, we're going to have choices of what to eat. When you see them, try to be aware of the cravings in your body. Try to be willing to have those cravings. See if they pass on their own. And whatever choice you make, try to bring a spirit of caring and kindness to yourself. For that is the mountain that we are all climbing. Thank you very much.